Recently, China seems to be focusing on dominating Southeast Asia. One by one, several Southeast Asian countries are being drawn into China's hands. Without firing a single shot, China is succeeding in making Southeast Asia's economy, markets, and even entire countries dependent on it. Let's dive into today's topic. According to the 2024 Southeast Asia Status Survey released by the Institute of South Asian Studies Yusof Ishak Institute, a think tank in Singapore, when asked which country Southeast Asia should cooperate with, the United States or China, 55% of the 2,000 respondents from 10 Southeast Asian countries chose China. This is up 11.6 points from 38.9% in 2023. For the first time in 5 years, more people chose China than the United States. China is very focused on Southeast Asia, and its role in the region is expanding. In a survey on partner countries' strategic relevance in Southeast Asia, China scored 8.98 out of 11, surpassing the United States as the region's most important partner. More people in Southeast Asia now view China favorably, especially in Indonesia, Laos, and Malaysia, according to the 2024 Southeast Asia Status Survey. In Malaysia, 75.1% like China, followed by Indonesia at 73.2% and Laos at 70.6%. In fact, according to the Asia Power Index by the Australian foreign policy think tank, the Lowy Institute, the overall influence of the United States is declining in countries like Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia, while China's dominance is said to be strengthening. All these countries that like China have one thing in common: their infrastructure has rapidly improved through the Belt and Road Initiative. Moreover, Southeast Asia is nearly powerless against China's aggressive investments and financial dominance. China is using this massive capital to invest and is now trying to take over even the economy and real estate market of Southeast Asia. China is also working to link Southeast Asian cities and ports with mainland China. Recently, China has been putting a lot of effort into the Yunnan region. Yunnan is the starting point of the Belt and Road Initiative in Southeast Asia. They're connecting Southeast Asian cities and ports to Yunnan province, essentially absorbing Southeast Asia's economy. Let's examine this further. You likely already know Cambodia and China have a strong relationship. A few months ago, Cambodia faced major problems with criminal organizations. However, it was revealed that these criminal organizations were being run by Chinese people, which caused a lot of controversy. These Chinese people arrived because of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Currently, China accounts for 80% of foreign investment in Cambodia. Cambodia and China are essentially a community of shared destiny. China uses Cambodia as a bridgehead to expand its influence in Southeast Asia. China has also sent weapons to Cambodia. Last September, the New York Times also reported on evidence of arms deals between China and Cambodia. Reports claim Y-20 transport aircraft delivered Chinese-made weapons and ammunition to Cambodia, which were then deployed near the Thai border. Interestingly, Thailand and China also have a good relationship. Recently, King Maha Vajiralongkorn of Thailand visited China for the first time. Spokesperson Mao Ning said King Vajiralongkorn's first official visit to China highlights the growing ties between China and Thailand, describing them as close, friendly neighbors with a shared future. China quickly used the Chinese community in Thailand to assert influence. Through their mutual visa exemption agreement, China is now making unlimited investments in Thailand. The China-Thailand railway construction is progressing rapidly. Above all, China is currently putting a lot of effort into Myanmar as well. China has purchased Kyaukphyu Port and is using it as its own port. The civil war in Myanmar has disrupted China's plans, but China remains focused on Myanmar. China aims to use Kyaukphyu Port to break the United States encirclement. Exerting influence for just $100 makes the region very appealing. If you check the map, more than 70% of China's oil imports go through the Strait of Malacca. Now imagine the strait is blocked in an emergency. This could immediately threaten China's energy security. If China opens Kyaukphyu Port in Myanmar and builds an oil pipeline for stable energy imports, it removes one of its vulnerabilities. China and India have been getting along recently but remain geopolitical rivals. But if China takes control of Kyaukphyu Port, its influence will extend to the Bay of Bengal, which is practically India's backyard. This gives China a way to keep India in check. With just this one port, China can monitor and counter India's moves, so there's no reason for China not to pursue it. Many Southeast Asian countries, including Laos, Indonesia, and Malaysia, maintain close ties and receive significant investment from China. But the problem is that what China is aiming for is a debt trap. China's debt trap diplomacy is now considered the most concerning diplomatic strategy in the world. The most representative example is Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. Sri Lanka received Chinese capital to build the port but couldn't handle the massive debt and eventually ended up handing over the port's operating rights to China for 99 years. The Sri Lankan government saw this as losing vital infrastructure linked to security and sovereignty, serving as a strong warning to neighbors. But the problem is that Southeast Asia is getting closer and closer to facing the same kind of risk now. Laos has borrowed billions to develop a high-speed railway with China, raising ongoing doubts about its ability to repay. China accounts for an overwhelming portion of Laos's national debt, and recently there has even been international concern that Laos might end up handing over certain infrastructure, just like Sri Lanka did. Myanmar is becoming more economically dependent on China. China is heavily investing in Myanmar's energy, mineral, and port projects amid civil war instability, creating a system that traps Myanmar in debt and hinders its escape from China's influence. There are concerns that Myanmar may eventually lose control of the Kyaukphyu port, since China is pursuing the project for strategic reasons. Cambodia is no exception. Following the influx of Chinese capital, Cambodia's economy, public security, agriculture, and casino industry have come under Chinese control, making the country economically dependent on China. Currently, 80% of the money Cambodia has borrowed from abroad comes from China, and at this level, the country's lifeline system is bound to be greatly influenced by China's will. This trend closely resembles the early signs of Sri Lanka's past debt traps. The same pattern continues. Huge infrastructure projects, soaring public debt, projects beyond the country's means, and heavy involvement from Chinese companies. China lends money, builds infrastructure, and when repayment becomes difficult, it takes control of that infrastructure to secure strategic footholds. This approach ultimately aligns with China's strategy to expand its geopolitical influence. Now, countries across Southeast Asia have already witnessed through Sri Lanka what kind of consequences this trap can bring. Nevertheless, the reality that it is still difficult to cut off Chinese capital serves as a warning that Southeast Asia is also at significant risk of being exposed to the same dangers. Of course, that doesn't mean Southeast Asian countries are just sitting idly by. On the surface, they talk about cooperation and partnership, but deep down, they are very wary of China's strategic intentions. Southeast Asian leaders and citizens recognize China's economic cooperation often hides deeper motives. They have seen that once Chinese investment enters, it swiftly expands its influence over industries, finance, and even national policies. Irreversible changes, like the Sinicization of some Cambodian regions, serve as a warning to Southeast Asia. That's why Southeast Asian countries are actively taking advantage of China's economic benefits, while complementing their security through cooperation with the United States. Chinese investment offers significant, rapid benefits, making it appealing to Southeast Asian countries in need of development. China is the only country able to quickly complete national infrastructure like roads, railways, ports, and power. The United States and Japan have slower, more complicated procedures, which can frustrate countries seeking fast results. In this reality, Southeast Asia cannot easily give up Chinese capital, and military cooperation with the United States becomes an even more important balancing factor. This is why trends such as joint exercises with the United States, allowing naval port calls, and strengthening defense agreements continue steadily. They use a dual strategy, relying on China economically and the United States for security to avoid favoring one side too much. Southeast Asia is well aware that while China's investment may provide growth opportunities in the short term, it could lead to industrial dependence and expanded political influence in the long run. So, although they publicly support working with China, they're also internally planning to safeguard key industries, restrict China's access to strategic infrastructure, and balance things by using United States or Japanese systems when needed. All the actions currently taken by Southeast Asian countries are part of their efforts to leverage both China's economic power and America's military strength to enhance their own survival strategies. Underlying this is a sense of crisis that if they lean completely to one side, they will lose their diplomatic options. China's investments are too appealing to stop, and it's quietly gaining control of Southeast Asia. Share your thoughts in the comments. That's the end of the video. Thank you.